right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Eddie Mack, looking live there at the U.S. Capitol building here on this Sunday. No movement as we are in yet another partial government shutdown. I'm Eddie Mack. Thank you to my colleague Stephanie Quinu for guiding you the last several hours. And on this Sunday, still no signs of a compromise between Republicans and Democrats over that immigration funding battle with the Department of Homeland Security. It started this partial shutdown on early Saturday morning. Republicans and Democrats could not come to a deal on some of the Democratic demands. Obviously, Republicans had other ideas on their mind. For more on this, let's take you out to Madeline Rivera on where we stand with this shutdown.
The blame game is in full swing as Democrats and Republicans remain at an impasse over DHS funding. Lawmakers are now in a previously scheduled recess. They left town without a deal in hand after Senate Democrats blocked the consideration of a spending bill earlier this week. Dems say a White House offer falls short of the changes they want to see for ICE. One of their biggest demands calls for DHS officers to get a judicial warrant before entering private property.
It's our expectation that we will respond to the unserious offer that Republicans have made that clearly omits things that need to happen, including but not limited to our demand that the Fourth Amendment be respected.
The White House, for their part, says they have been involved in good faith negotiations. Republicans have cast some Democratic positions as unreasonable, adding they should be willing to make concessions too.
We're talking, but, we have to protect law enforcement. ICE has done a phenomenal job. Border Patrol, we have a closed border for the first time in history. We have to protect law enforcement.
So now DHS is facing a lapse in funding, marking the third time at least part of the government has shut down in less than 6 months. Remember, though, ICE received a significant amount of funding from the One Big Beautiful Bill. There are other agencies under the vast DHS umbrella, like TSA, FEMA, and the Coast Guard, that could take the biggest hits. Many of these employees will still be on the job. They just likely won't get paid until the shutdown ends, putting another financial strain after the country's longest government shutdown in the fall.
We heard reports of officers sleeping in their cars at airports to save money on gas, selling their blood and plasma, and taking on second jobs to make ends meet.
It's unclear when this will end. It may continue through the State of the Union address on February 24th. In Washington, Madeline Rivera, Fox News.
All right, thank you so much for that. On social media, Speaker Mike Johnson saying, here we go again, the new Democratic shutdown. This time, the Department of Homeland Security will hit some very important programs. FEMA, TSA, Coast Guard operations. That means delayed disaster, airport chaos, weakened law enforcement. Democrats are once again risking public safety just to stage a pointless political stunt. Of course, we heard from Madeline Rivera, unclear when this would end. Let's be joined right now by Axios reporter Kate Santaliz. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And this 2-week stopgap, it was a little ambitious that these two sides would come together to make it work. How long, potentially, could this last?
Well, the fact that Congress, both chambers, are going to be out of session next week is really a reflection of how far apart they are from a deal right now. So we don't know how long the shutdown could last, but it could drag on for weeks. And a good sign, the White House and Senate Democrats have been negotiating and they have been trading proposals back and forth. And that's a difference from what we saw during the record-breaking 43-day shutdown, where Democrats were refusing to fund the government without an extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. The White House is really involved here in a way they weren't then. So that is a good sign. But however, Senate Democrats, as soon as Friday, had rejected the White House's latest proposal, saying it hadn't gone far enough, and they have their own list of demands that they want included. Some of those demands include forcing officers to wear body cameras, enforcing a uniform code of conduct, demasking officers, and body cameras really seems to be the only one with bipartisan support. So those other demands have been called non-starters by Republicans.
Yeah, obviously both sides kind of have their non-starters. Talk about judicial warrants, Republicans saying there's no way they can include those. Have either side even hinted at a compromise as something they'd be willing to take off the table for something else?
I mean, not really. Both sides seem very dug in here. We heard Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer on CNN this morning basically say Republicans just have to accept what Democrats are demanding here. And then we heard Senator Mark Wayne Mullen basically say, well, this is just political theater from Democrats. So besides body cameras, that's really the only area of bipartisan compromise that we have seen. And we have seen Republicans come out against a lot of their demands from Democrats. So.
Yeah, that is a very good point. There's potentially no end in sight for this, but over Department of Homeland Security, every Republican talking about the one big beautiful bill funding that for quite some time. So that's also an interesting point. You also wrote an interesting article about what's going on inside of the Republican Party, especially in the House, saying there's increasingly frustration with members that repeatedly threaten rule. Of course, the representative from Nebraska, Don Bacon, told Axios the repeat offenders should have their committee assignment stripped, saying there should be a day of reckoning at some point. And Don Bacon amongst those, Anna Paulina Luna, Tim Burchett, just some of the few names in the Republican Party that continue to kind of make waves. Is this a slim one-vote majority? What more can you tell us about this reporting? How much infighting is there among House Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting dynamic. There is this growing frustration with regular rank and file Republicans watching this same group of colleagues basically every week threaten to tank rule votes. And rule votes are just procedural votes in the House that allow members to begin debating a bill. They used to be a rubber stamp for the majority party. If you were in the majority, you would vote yes. If you were in the minority, you would vote no. But because of Johnson's such slim majorities, he basically only has a one-vote margin. A lot of these members have decided to use these votes for leverage to extract concessions that may or may not be related to the bill that they're debating at the time. So near weekly, we see GOP leadership huddle with various holdouts on the floor, go back and forth. Eventually, the holdouts flip and they walk out claiming these wins that they've gotten. But this hostage taking that's happening every single week is starting to really frustrate the regular Republicans who feel like I'm a good, loyal member. I fall in line every single time. And now these holdouts are dominating the conversation. And some, like Bacon, think that there should be punishment. But a lot of them also acknowledge the fact that if you do go ahead and punish these members, they don't really have an incentive to continue voting with the party. So it's a really tricky situation and one that we're going to continue to see as Johnson's working with such a slim majority.
And one of those loyal Republicans, Carlos Jimenez, Republican from Florida, kind of instituted that, spoke to that, saying, if they do it, why don't the rest of us play this similar game? How much of a slippery slope is it for Speaker Mike Johnson? Because if someone sees they get their way on something else, you might have even more people kind of get in line to kind of take a number for any other demand they have. Have we seen an increase in some of this unrest from other Republicans that might generally be loyal?
Yes, this tactic has been used by other members before. Van Drew, for example, who's quoted in that story, is saying that he's frustrated with this, did do this on a rule for the Speed Act a couple of months ago. But he said that it's a tactic that should really be used judiciously. It should not be happening every single week. But Johnson could have a problem on his hands. However, something that I heard across the board from members from the Freedom Caucus to moderate members is that Johnson is doing the best job that he can handling this situation. Former Speaker Kevin McCarthy kind of took a firmer hand, for example, and a lot of members just didn't end up listening. And some members voted to oust him because of that iron fist that he led with. So we could see this happening with other members, but a lot of those members do want to stay loyal and do want to fall in line and want accountability from the members that continue to do this instead.
I also find it interesting that a lot of these quotes, some of these quotes, especially from Don Bacon, he is not seeking re-election. And he said in that article, quote, it's like these guys never played team sports before, but he's almost seemingly quitting on the team by leaving Congress and leaving them out. We've seen that amongst other Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene resigning. We've seen other people not seek re-election. How much is there in that, where if you potentially are redrawn or drawn out of a member of Congress, that you kind of have to vote whatever?
Right. I mean, we've seen almost a record number of retirements from the House this year. I believe we're at 51 now. Once we hit 53, that will be the record. You do kind of have a different incentive if you're a retiring member. Don Bacon, for example, voted to get rid of the ban on voting against tariffs. Representative Dan Newhouse from Washington, who's retiring, voted to overturn Trump's tariffs on Canada. So you can kind of vote your conscience a little bit more when you're retiring. But for the most part, most of the members do feel like they want to be a team player. They want to stay in the game. But at some point, they will break from the president in a way that a member who isn't retiring wouldn't.
Yeah, you mentioned the tariffs, that vote, and amongst the Republicans that sided with the Democrats, a few are retiring, a few are potentially being drawn out, and the other one being Thomas Massie, and we know how the president feels about him in terms of everything going on. I want to talk about something else between the House and the Senate, because the Save America Act is on the minds of so many people, including House Republicans there. It's moved through, doesn't really have any momentum. Senate Majority Leader John Thune saying you would have to nuke the filibuster to get it through. How much is there frustration with House Republicans with what's going on in the Senate in terms of this legislation not gaining any kind of ground there?
There is a ton of frustration about the Senate's refusal to take up the SAVE Act. Like you said, they don't have 60 votes in the Senate for this legislation right now. There's no way to get it through without getting rid of that 60 vote threshold. And a lot of members are calling on Senate Majority Leader John Thune to get rid of the filibuster in order to take it up. Representative Anna Paulina Luna, for example, almost tanked a government funding bill over the Senate's refusal to bring it up, and eventually went to a meeting at the White House with Trump where he made this pledge that it would get through somehow. And then she relented. But there is a lot of frustration overall among congressional Republicans over the lack of action on this. And I know Trump had floated an executive action implementing some of the SAVE Act measures, but it's unclear how that is going to land with Congress. That happened after they were out of session. But as of now, the Senate, it does not seem likely that they are going to blow up the 60 vote threshold and get this through.
And it doesn't seem like Speaker Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune seeing eye to eye. We saw it during this kind of DHS funding battle where John Thune wanted a potential CR. Mike Johnson said, hey, let's go forward with the full funding and see how Democrats vote on there. Is there any kind of instability between those two leaders, both Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate in terms of their leadership?
Well, there's always a little bit of a feud between Senate and House Republicans over which chamber is better. But yes, in this scenario, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect there. I mean, getting the 2-week DHS CR through the House 2 weeks ago was nearly impossible for Johnson. That was very difficult. It's unlikely he'd be able to get another CR through again. And conservatives, now that we're reopening up this DHS full year funding bill, they're going to have their own demands that they want in there too, around sanctuary cities, other policies, ones that Democrats won't accept. Because the House has such small margins, it's going to be very difficult for Johnson to get a future DHS funding bill back through.
And do you think this pressure, this kind of mounting weight of all these shutdowns with the midterms coming in just a few months down the line, do you think that has any impact?
It definitely will have an impact, especially if this shutdown drags on for a long time. Like you said, TSA is going to be impacted, so we could start seeing longer lines at the airport. That's something that no one likes. But at the same time, this issue that is at the heart of this shutdown, ICE, is very important for both bases, both Democrat and Republicans. And we have seen some independents start to go towards what the Democrats are saying. They want to see a little bit of reining in of ICE and those tactics, but it's going to be very fascinating to watch how this affects the upcoming midterms.
And I know we're talking a lot about House Republicans, House Senate Republicans as well. How unified are the Democrats? Are they all warm and cozy there in that party, or is there also unrest there?
You definitely have some on the left among the Democrats that are pushing for harder reforms, taking a harder line. A couple weeks ago, there was a big disconnect between Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Leader Jeffries in the House. Schumer had negotiated that 2-week DHS CR, and Jeffries essentially told Johnson, Democrats are not going to help you for this, even though it was a deal that Schumer negotiated. So oftentimes it seems they're not really on the same page there. But in terms in the Senate, Democrats do seem to be united, besides Senator John Fetterman, on not funding ICE further without significant reforms. It's not clear how long that unity is going to hold. The last shutdown, we saw a number of Democrats eventually peel off and vote for the funding bill, but right now they feel unified on that.
Yeah, and similar in the place where there are some exodus of lawmakers in terms of the Democrats in House and Senate, but also in terms of their kind of midterm pressure from them. Katie, anything else you're monitoring? Because as we mentioned, as you noted, this shutdown will continue for at least another week. We'll see where it lands and how the negotiations go. What are you keeping an eye on right now on Capitol Hill?
So we do have the State of the Union the week that Congress returns. And in 2019, there was a question of if the State of the Union should continue. There was a shutdown during that time. And I'm hearing from some GOP leadership sources that there's a concern about having the State of the Union while parts of the government are shuttered. Having Trump address how great our State of the Union is while DHS is shut down might not look the best optically. So that's going to be something to watch over the next week, whether leaders move to postpone the State of the Union or not.
Yeah, and obviously President Trump will have his own opinions on all of that, as well as the say in this funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Katie, thank you. Kate, thank you so much. I appreciate your time here on Live Now from Fox.